The war had been raging for over a century, an intergalactic conflict spanning thousands of planets. The invaders, known only as the Jaran Collective, were ruthless, calculating, and nearly unstoppable. They had crushed civilization after civilization, absorbing their technology, resources, and people into their ever-growing empire. Resistance was futile, or so it seemed. Every rebellion ended in annihilation. The Jaran Collective was too advanced, too brutal, and too numerous. Humanity had watched from the fringes, too weak to interfere, too new to the stars to join the fray. But when the Jaran Collective's war machine began to encroach on the final unclaimed sectors, Earth could no longer ignore the war. It was now or never. The Jarans had begun to set their sights on the resources of Sol, and with it, the fate of the human race hung in the balance. And then, Earth did the unthinkable. For the first time in history, the full might of humanity's military forces, a coalition of the strongest nations, deployed in a unified front, activating their advanced fleet of ships, weapons, and soldiers. The world's best minds, now armed with decades of research and technological leaps, turned the tides. It was supposed to be a moment of great triumph. But the first moments of the human intervention were anything but victorious. The fleet of human warships emerged from the folds of space, streaking toward the battlefront like fireflies in the cold vacuum of space. The commanders watched from their ships, the great pride of human engineering shining in the vastness. Yet as they neared the front lines, their stomachs churned. The invaders, the Jaran Collective, had already begun their campaign, advancing rapidly toward their next conquest. The Jaran ships were massive, sleek, dark, and terrifying, exuding an aura of invincibility. The flagship of humanity, the Colossus, led the charge. It was the pride of human ingenuity, a vessel equipped with experimental weapons that combined human technology with recovered alien tech, an unholy amalgamation designed specifically to defeat the Jarans. Commanded by General Voss, a war hero from the Earthfront, the Colossus was humanity's spearhead. Its engines hummed with the power of fusion reactors, a force unlike anything seen before. And yet, as the enemy appeared on the radar, the tension grew. "Brace for impact," Voss shouted, his voice crackling over the comms. A dozen Jaran ships appeared on the tactical map, heading straight for them. Their weapons were already charging. The first salvo from the Jaran Collective struck the human fleet like a hammer to glass. Energy weapons exploded across the sky, tearing into the Colossus hull. Sparks erupted as the shields flickered and failed. The great ship groaned as it shuddered under the assault, and the entire fleet seemed to buckle under the sudden pressure. "Shields at 40%. Power flux detected," yelled a technician, panic in his voice. "The Jarans, they've adapted. They are using a new weapon frequency." Voss gritted his teeth, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. They had anticipated many things. But the Jarans' ability to adapt and evolve in the midst of battle was their greatest strength. These weapons, these new frequencies, were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. "Engage evasive maneuvers, full power to the front-facing shields," Voss ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. He would not show fear. On the battlefield, chaos raged. The Jaran ships were everywhere, cruisers, dreadnoughts, and smaller vessels weaving through the void with deadly precision. Humanity's ships, though heavily armored, lacked the raw speed and maneuverability of their enemies. The enemy was everywhere. Human fighters launched from their carriers, hurtling into space like angry wasps. They were outnumbered, but they fought fiercely, armed with every weapon Earth had developed. General Voss watched in grim silence as his crew scrambled to repel the assault. The Colossus was slowly becoming a wreck in space. The first few minutes were brutal. Ships that had taken months to prepare for battle were now falling apart in seconds. Humanity's first intervention, and it was already turning into a slaughter. "Commander Voss," shouted Lieutenant Celine, his voice piercing through the chaos of the bridge. "The enemy's closing in. We need to make a move or we'll be obliterated." Voss turned to her, his eyes dark with resolve. "Prepare the experimental weapon. It's our only shot." Celine nodded grimly, rushing to engage the controls for the Colossus' final hope, the prototype energy cannon that had been designed to break through Jaran shields. The cannon had never been tested in real combat, but they had no choice now. The weapon hummed to life, as the crew held their breath, hoping that the calculations would hold up. The Jaran ships continued their relentless attack, and as the seconds ticked by, the Colossus seemed to shrink before the oncoming storm. With every passing moment, more ships fell, consumed by the Jaran's relentless fire. The battlefield felt hopeless, an endless nightmare from which there would be no escape. And then, just as all seemed lost, the weapon fired. A pulse of blinding white energy erupted from the front of the Colossus, splitting the void like a lightning strike from the heavens. The Jaran ships faltered, their shields weakening, their formations thrown into disarray. The first shot was a success, barely. But it was enough to make the Jarans realize something had shifted. Voss exhaled, his hand clenching into a fist. It's working. But we can't hold on much longer. On the other side of the battlefield, Commander Zalek of the Jaran fleet observed the sudden shift with a sharp eye. His command ship, the Apocalypse, remained untouched in the rear as his forces took the brunt of the human assault. The humans had just demonstrated something unexpected. A weapon that could penetrate their shields? It was an anomaly, and Zalek wasn't sure if it was something to be ignored or feared. But fear was not in the Jaran playbook. The Jarans were warriors, not cowards. They adapted. Initiate the Siphon Protocol, Zalek ordered coldly. Far from the front line, the Jaran flagship began to emit a strange, deep hum. An invisible wave of energy rippled through the battlefield as their advanced technology began to interfere with human communications. The Jaran's next move was coming, and it would be devastating. At that moment, the tide of the battle shifted again. The human fleet, already battered and broken, was about to face something far worse than they had ever imagined. And the clock was ticking. The energy wave from the Jaran flagship hit humanity's fleet with terrifying precision. Communications died instantly. The moment the wave washed over the human ships, every communication channel went silent. The officers on the Colossus stared at their monitors, their hands hovering over the controls, powerless. The battlefield had turned into a chaotic, isolated nightmare. "We're blind," Lieutenant Celine whispered, her voice a mix of disbelief and growing panic. "All channels are down. We can't communicate with the rest of the fleet. It's like we're alone." Voss's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the damage. The Jarans had just shown their hand. The Siphon Protocol was no ordinary weapon. It wasn't just an EMP burst, it was something far more complex. The Jaran Collective had developed a device capable of severing all digital and electrical communication on a massive scale. The hum he'd heard earlier wasn't just the beginning of the weapon's activation, it was the pulse that now blanketed the battlefield, rendering humanity's fleet virtually useless. Without communication, coordination between the ships broke down. Commanders were unable to issue orders, fighters were forced to operate on limited autopilot, and ship-to-ship combat became a haphazard struggle for survival. "We need to break the Siphon's hold. Now," Voss growled, slamming his fist against the console. Celine was already working on a solution, fingers flying over the controls. "I've been analyzing it. The Siphon wave targets our systems, but there's a way to bypass it. It'll require time, but—" The ship rocked violently, and alarms blared throughout the Colossus. Jaran fighters, sensing an opening, had launched another wave of attacks, closing in like sharks to blood. One Jaran ship, a sleek predator, swerved dangerously close, its guns locking onto the human flagship. "Brace for impact," shouted Voss. The human fleet, battered and broken, was now a sitting duck. But Voss wasn't about to go down without a fight. He locked eyes with Celine, who nodded. There was only one way to get through this: break the Siphon Protocol's hold and hope for a miracle. As the Colossus shook again under the assault, Celine dove deeper into the system, trying to access the ship's emergency override. She muttered to herself, an urgent prayer under her breath. "Come on, come on." Meanwhile, Voss activated the ship's emergency thrusters, pushing the Colossus into evasive maneuvers. The human flagship veered sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding a laser barrage from a Jaran dreadnought. The ship's hull screeched in protest as it twisted, but Voss knew it was their only shot. "All hands to battle stations," he roared. "Get me that override." The Jarans didn't give them time to breathe. Their fighters dove toward the Colossus, and the deadly dance of close-quarters space combat began. The human fleet was scattered across the expanse, each ship desperately trying to fend off the Jaran onslaught. Back on the Colossus, Celine's hands were shaking as she navigated the interface. The siphon was unlike any other weapon the humans had faced. It was designed to disable every electronic function within range, short-circuiting everything from weapons to life support systems. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a signal, a field that surrounded the enemy fleet, attacking humanity's ability to fight back. But there was a way around it. She found the command prompt, buried deep within the system. "I've got it," she shouted, pulling up the override command. "I can give us a temporary blind spot. It'll short out the siphon's hold for a few minutes, enough for us to fight back." "Do it, now," Voss barked. "Give us something, anything." With a trembling finger, Celine hit the execute button. The ship trembled as a surge of energy pulsed through its core. The systems flickered, came back online, and then, silence. For a heartbeat, the Colossus was back in control, its systems functioning, weapons powered, shields re-engaged. "Ready the weapons," Voss commanded. "Prepare to retaliate." The Jaran fighters, sensing a shift in the tide, hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was all Voss needed. The Colossus fired a burst from its experimental energy cannon, a pulse of white-hot destruction. The shot streaked across the void, crashing into a Jaran warship. The blast splintered the Jaran vessel, sending fragments scattering into the depths of space. The crew erupted in a cheer, but Voss's face remained grim. "It's not over yet. The siphon is still working, and if we don't take out that flagship, we won't last." The human ships, now partially re-energized, rallied under the command of the Colossus. Fighters zoomed back into formation, but the Jaran force had already adapted. New Jaran dreadnoughts emerged from the shadow of their flagship, their weapons powered, ready to destroy. Voss clenched his jaw. "Target their flagship. We take down Zalek, we take down their advantage." But as the Colossus fired its weapons again, a massive new threat appeared on the radar, something they had not anticipated. It was a Jaran capital ship, larger than any other they had encountered, emerging from the darkness like a giant prowler. "It's the Oblivion," Celine gasped, eyes wide. "The Jaran superweapon. It's not just a ship, it's a fortress." And indeed, the Oblivion was a fortress. A massive, planet-sized warship that could obliterate entire fleets with its sheer size and firepower. It had been a myth, something whispered about in the intelligence reports. No one knew it existed. But now, standing at the center of the battlefield, it made its presence known. The Colossus fired once more, a final desperate shot aimed directly at the Oblivion. But the sheer size of the Jaran superweapon absorbed the blast, and its own cannons fired in return. The energy surged toward the human fleet, a pulse of destruction that could wipe them from the stars. "Brace for impact," Voss yelled, gripping the sides of his chair. The Oblivion's weapons struck the Colossus with the force of a planet's destruction. The ship's shields held for a moment before they shattered, and the hull cracked under the force. Sparks flew, and alarms blared once more. But in that moment, something inside Voss clicked. Something inside him snapped. The war wasn't over. Not yet. They weren't done. "Prepare for boarding," he muttered, his voice low. "We end this now." And with that, the battle truly began. The Colossus was a broken shell, its once pristine exterior now scorched and cracked. The energy blast from the Oblivion had crippled most of its systems, but Voss had not given up. Even with the ship limping through space, damaged beyond repair, he knew one thing: humanity's final chance at victory lay not in their weapons, but in their courage. They would board the Oblivion and end the Jaran threat from within. "Prepare to launch the assault teams," Voss barked over the intercom, his voice cutting through the noise of the damaged bridge. "Celine, I need those ducking ports active. Now." "Already on it," Celine replied, fingers flying over the console as the ship shuddered under another round of Jaran fire. The Colossus groaned as its outer hull contorted under the pressure, but she was determined to make it work. There was no choice now. No retreat. "Boarding pods ready, General," came the voice of Commander Wren, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "We'll be able to dock on the Oblivion within minutes." "Make it fast," Voss said, glancing out at the vast, looming shadow of the Jaran superweapon. It was impossibly large, too large to fight with conventional tactics. The Oblivion wasn't just a warship, it was a mobile fortress. But within it, Zalek, the Jaran commander, was waiting, his arrogance and overconfidence blinding him to the only real threat, the humans who would stop at nothing to see them crushed. The Colossus continued to drift through space, listing under fire, but the assault pods were ready. As the outer doors to the Colossus hangar bay opened, Voss was the first to step into the pod, his combat gear tight against his body, his pulse racing with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. His crew followed in swift succession, a team of elite soldiers prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. "Get to the enemy flagship," Voss commanded, his tone cold, resolute. "Disable their engines. If we don't, we'll be their next target." "Yes, General," came the unified response from his squad. The pods launched from the Colossus, propelled into the cold vacuum of space by massive thrusters. The Jaran dreadnoughts loomed in the distance, their weapons locked onto humanity's failing fleet. As the assault pods hurtled toward the Oblivion, the crew braced for impact. Their mission was simple: infiltrate, destroy the enemy command, and take down the Jaran Empire from the inside. The pods cut through space like meteors, their sleek shapes designed to pierce the darkness and deliver the humans to their target. The sheer distance between the two ships made the journey feel like an eternity, but within moments, the pods struck the outer hull of the Oblivion. The explosive force of the docking clamps ensured their entry, sending them skidding through the walls and into the interior of the ship. The crew disembarked immediately, weapons raised, ready to face whatever waited inside. They entered the superweapon with grim determination, moving through the dark, metallic corridors, their footsteps echoing through the silent hallways. They had only one objective: find Zalek. The Jaran commander was hiding somewhere within the bowels of this fortress, and once they found him, he would die. "Keep your eyes open," Voss said, his voice a whisper as they moved deeper into the belly of the Oblivion. "Jaran troops are everywhere." The silence was broken by the sharp hum of Jaran technology as they passed sleek consoles and complex, alien machinery. The interior of the Oblivion was a maze of cold, metallic surfaces, its architecture alien and oppressive. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every turn promising danger. But they were ready. The humans had faced worse. They had survived worse. Then, without warning, the first Jaran guards appeared, a pair of hulking warriors, their weapons raised and ready to fire. They opened fire on the humans, but the assault team was faster. One soldier, Dax, took them down with surgical precision, his plasma rifle cutting through the Jaran armor like butter. The bodies crumpled to the floor, the only sound the metallic clang of their fall. "Keep moving," Voss ordered, his eyes narrowed, focused. They moved swiftly through the corridors, their target ahead. The Jarans were efficient, every hallway was filled with armed patrols, automated defenses, and traps. But the human soldiers, driven by purpose and desperation, were relentless. They fought their way through every obstacle, their skill and training enabling them to cut down anything in their path. With every step, they grew closer to their goal. Zalek, the leader of the Jaran collective, the one who had brought war to Earth's doorstep, was within reach. "Voss," Celine called over the comms, her voice tense. "We've located the central command hub. Zalek is there." Voss didn't hesitate. He knew the time had come. They had to end this war, or humanity would cease to exist. The human team reached the heart of the Oblivion, the doors sliding open to reveal the control room. It was silent, save for the low hum of Jaran machinery. At the far end of the room, sitting calmly on a throne-like chair, was Zalek himself, his eyes glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. He was taller than any human, his body a mass of interwoven alien armor, with sharp, angular features that radiated authority. Zalek didn't stand as the humans entered. Instead, he studied them with an almost bored expression, as if they were nothing more than a nuisance. So, the humans finally joined the fight, he mused. I knew you would eventually. But you're too late. The Jaran Collective is already unstoppable. Voss's heart pounded in his chest. He had been prepared for this moment. He had rehearsed this encounter 1,000 times in his mind. Not this time, Zalek. Your empire ends here. Without warning, Zalek rose from his chair, his movements unnervingly graceful. He reached for a weapon embedded in his gauntlet, a blade of pure energy materializing in his hand. You misunderstand, Zalek said, his voice cold and disdainful. The Jaran Collective is already a part of you, Voss. You cannot defeat us. You cannot defeat me. A strange pulse of energy filled the room, and the Jaran commander lunged forward with terrifying speed. Voss didn't hesitate. His team fired in unison, but Zalek moved with a blur, dodging their shots, his energy blade flashing as he parried their attacks. The room erupted into chaos. Zalek was faster, stronger, and his energy blade cut through human armor like paper. Soldiers fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground as they tried to counterattack. The battle was fierce, but Zalek was a force of nature, his Jaran physiology and technology giving him an edge that the humans couldn't match. Voss fought desperately, using every ounce of his training to avoid the deadly blade. But Zalek was everywhere at once, his strikes coming faster than the human soldiers could react. And then, in the heat of the battle, Voss saw an opening. It was small, but it was enough. He lunged forward, his plasma blade activating, and the two leaders clashed in a brutal, furious duel. Sparks flew as their weapons collided, each strike sending shockwaves through the room. You will fall, Zalek, Voss growled through clenched teeth. Humanity will never bow to your empire. Zalek's laugh was cold, almost mocking. Your resistance is meaningless. You're all the same, fragile, expendable. But as he raised his blade for a final strike, Voss moved with lightning speed, his blade cutting through the Jaran armor with a single, precise slash. Zalek staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. Blood, if you could call it that, spilled from the wound, and the mighty Jaran commander collapsed to the floor, his energy blade flickering out. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Voss stood over the fallen commander, his chest heaving with exertion. The Jaran Empire, so vast and so powerful, had just lost its leader. The tide had turned. And then, all across the battlefield, the impossible happened. The Jaran fleet began to falter. Their ships, once coordinated and invincible, began to break apart, their control lost without their commander. The Siphon Protocol went silent, and humanity's fleet, now freed from the disabling wave, began to retaliate with renewed fury. The war was not over, but humanity had just won the first, and most important, battle. The silence in the control room of the Oblivion was deafening. The fallen form of Zalek, the once mighty Jaran commander, lay sprawled on the cold metal floor, his energy blade flickering out. For a moment, the universe seemed to stand still, the only sound the ragged breathing of General Voss and his surviving soldiers. Voss's chest heaved as he stood over the body of the enemy leader, his grip tightening around his plasma blade. The battle wasn't won, not yet. There was still much to be done, but with Zalek's death, the heart of the Jaran Collective had been struck. The ripple effects were immediate and catastrophic for the Jarans. General, Celine called out, her voice breaking the heavy silence. The fleet, they are retreating. It's happening. Voss didn't move at first. He was still processing the weight of the moment. Zalek, the architect of this war, was dead. The invincible empire of the Jaran Collective had just lost its command. He glanced over at Celine, who stood near the console, eyes wide as she watched the real-time data feed. Her fingers hovered over the controls, the reality of their victory beginning to sink in. Are you sure? Voss asked, his voice hoarse, disbelief still clinging to him. Celine nodded, her face a mixture of awe and exhaustion. They are breaking formation. Ships are disengaging across the battlefield. The Siphon Protocol, it's been deactivated. We've won, General. We've actually won. Voss turned toward the shattered windows of the command center, his gaze falling on the battlefield outside. The human fleet, battered and scarred, was no longer fighting for survival. They were pushing forward with a ferocity that only victory could bring. Jaran's ships, once an impenetrable wall, were now scattering in every direction. Their command structure had crumbled, and without Zalek's leadership, the collective had fractured. The remaining Jaran vessels, massive dreadnoughts and fearsome cruisers, appeared to be lost without direction. In the chaos of their retreat, entire fleets collided with each other, their once unified forces now crumbling apart. The remaining human ships, though battered, were fully functional and eager to finish the job. "We need to follow through," Voss said, his voice steady now, a quiet determination replacing the uncertainty. "We can't let them regroup. Let's finish this." As his team mobilized, readying themselves for the next phase of their counteroffensive, Voss took a moment to reflect. This wasn't just a victory, it was a revolution. Humanity had proven, in the span of a mere 5 hours, that they were more than just pawns on the galactic stage. They were fighters. And they had shattered the myth of Jaran invincibility. But Voss knew this was only the beginning. There were still more Jaran ships out there, and they would not go down quietly. The collective had a vast empire, and their people would not surrender without a fight. This victory would create a vacuum, a power struggle among the Jaran ranks. But it also marked the beginning of humanity's rise to power. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, the surviving human ships and fighters pursued the fleeing Jaran forces. The once stormy chaos of combat had calmed into a tense but focused frenzy as the last remnants of the Jaran fleet scattered into the void. On the Colossus, the crew was working tirelessly to manage the damage. The once proud flagship was now a hulk of metal and flame, its once thriving bridge reduced to a war-torn battlefield of broken consoles and scattered debris. Yet there was no time for celebration. The war had not been won in full yet, and the Jaran retreat was the perfect opportunity to strike the killing blow. "Voss, we've got incoming reinforcements," shouted a crew member, their voice rising above the din of the damaged bridge. Jaran dreadnoughts reappearing from the other side of the battlefield. "It's a trap." Voss's eyes snapped toward the tactical map. It was true. While the Jarans were retreating, they had reinforcements ready to pounce. A second wave of Jaran ships, far larger and more dangerous than the first, was arriving to take control of the battlefield once more. It seemed the Jarans had planned for this contingency. "They are not going to give up without a fight," Voss muttered, eyeing the incoming ships. "Prepare for another round." "General," came Celine's voice, urgent. "We've received a message from Earth Command." "Put it through," Voss ordered, his mind already racing through his options. The situation had grown even more complicated, but he had to think fast. A hologram flickered into life in front of him, a stern-faced officer from Earth Command. "General Voss," the officer's voice crackled over the transmission. "We've been monitoring the situation. We've confirmed Jaran reinforcements are on their way. But this is our moment. We have to strike now, before they can regroup." "I'm aware," Voss replied, his voice sharp. "We've dealt a blow, but the Jarans are resourceful. We need to cut them off at the source. If we don't strike now, we'll lose this opportunity." The Earth officer nodded. "We're committing every available resource to the front lines. We'll support your efforts. The battle must end today, General." With a grim nod, Voss turned to his crew. "This is it," he said, a fire in his eyes. "We have a chance to end this war for good. We don't have time for hesitation. Every ship, every fighter, we push forward. We end the Jaran threat, now." The final assault was swift, a desperate gamble. The human fleet, now bolstered by reinforcements from Earth, charged into the heart of the Jaran reinforcements. The Jaran ships were larger and more powerful, but they were scattered, disorganized, and fighting without the unified coordination that had once made them a galaxy-spanning empire. The Colossus led the charge, a symbol of humanity's resilience. With Voss at the helm, the flagship tore through the Jaran forces, its weapons firing in perfect synchrony with the remaining human ships. Jaran ships exploded in massive bursts, their once mighty hulls disintegrating under the intensity of the human assault. But even as the Durans began to break, their flagship, an enormous, nearly indestructible vessel, remained. The Oblivion, though crippled, was still alive, and it launched one final desperate counterattack. A hail of fire erupted from its core, targeting the Colossus directly. The human flagship shook violently as it took the full brunt of the blast. It was a final, unrelenting wave, a last-ditch effort by the Durans to destroy their human adversaries. But the Colossus didn't falter. General Voss stood resolute at the helm, his hands steady as he navigated the flagship through the chaos. With one final push, the Colossus unleashed a barrage of its own, tearing into the Oblivion. The massive ship's shields flickered and collapsed under the onslaught, and with a final catastrophic explosion, the Jaran flagship erupted in a violent, blinding flash. And then, there was silence. Humanity had won. As the dust of battle settled, the Jaran collective was in disarray. The fleet that had once been unstoppable was now broken, scattered across the galaxy. The human forces had dealt the final blow, but Voss knew that victory came at a high price. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of ships, both Jaran and human. Lives had been lost, but the war had ended. In that moment, as the stars seemed to flicker and shimmer in the distance, Voss stood in the ruins of the Oblivion, looking out over the battlefield. The Durans had been defeated, not by sheer force alone, but by the resilience, ingenuity, and relentless spirit of humanity. The war was over. For now, humanity had proven that they were not to be underestimated. And the universe would never forget what happened when humans finally joined the war.